Boris Johnson's a cunt, Boris Johnson the 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 fucking cunt. Boris Johnson the cunt, 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 Boris Johnson the fucking cunt. Boris Johnson the cunt, 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 Boris Johnson the fucking cunt.
Once again, we find ourselves addressing a slow collapse of all that we once thought valuable, or all that we once perhaps even thought was inviolable, stuff that just couldn't happen in this country. A Prime Minister, repeatedly it would seem, misleading the House of Commons, and yet this morning a Minister, perhaps predictably Grant Shapps, although let's be honest, it could have been any one of them, couldn't it? Because to take a job in that cabinet, you have to leave your conscience and your moral compass at the door, so it could have been Nadhim Zahawi, who was debasing himself yesterday. It was Grant Shapps' turn today to defend the indefensible. It was, I think, and you'll forgive me for sometimes getting the actual quote mixed up with the lyric from Lin-Manuel Miranda's superlative musical, it was Alexander Hamilton who said, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. It's one of those phrases that sounds perfectly pithy, isn't it? Or pithily perfect, perhaps. And yet the more you think about it, the more sophisticated an observation it is. These people do not stand for anything. And therefore they will fall for everything. And the same is sadly true of their supporters and their cheerleaders in the media. The Daily Mail today has on its front page, remember after a fortnight of obsessing furiously about the confected scandal of Keir Starmer's beer and curry, the Daily Mail, the best-selling newspaper in the country, has a story on its front page about the possible impacts of a possible strike on the railways. I mean, quite how you can end up holding your readers in such contempt that you're trying to sell them the idea that that's the most important story in town after 2 weeks of claiming that Keir Starmer's beer and curry in an office where people had been working is somehow comparable scandal. I mean, the mind truly boggles. But I am also today, and if you were tuning in expecting fury, then I have to tell you, it's not fury anymore. I don't know what it is. We may even be self-indulgent enough to do a phone-in on what we feel today. I'm not sure yet. As you know, I rarely make my mind up before, well, I'd like to say 15:15, but let's not kid ourselves. It's usually closer to 20 past, isn't it, these days? I don't know quite what it is that I feel. Fear, perhaps, actually. A fear of what is left when everything of value and importance is removed. The ministerial code makes it pretty clear that if you are found to have misled the House, and who but the most sycophantic forelock tugger today could argue that he hasn't already been found to have misled the House, then that would be a resignation issue. But that is in normal times. That is a regime or a government where if the independent advisor on ministerial standards submits a report pointing out and concluding that the Home Secretary is a bully, then the Home Secretary is toast. We do not live in that country anymore. If the House of Commons passes a motion calling for the release of security advice on whether or not the son of a former KGB agent should be elevated to the House of Lords, then that advice would be published. But we don't live in that country anymore. If a Prime Minister stands up in front of the entire country and claims he never attended any parties and then is forced to admit that actually he did, then there would be a resignation immediately. But we don't live in that country anymore. If a senior ally of a Prime Minister is found to have acted corruptly while lobbying for companies that pay him for his services and subsequently fibbing about it, he would get a month-long suspension and everybody else in his party would hang their head in shame. But we don't live in that country anymore because, of course, they tried to save Owen Paterson with the collusion of client journalists and pom-pom-waving cheerleaders in the highest offices of Fleet Street. If a senior advisor to the Prime Minister were to be found to have ridden roughshod, driven a coach and horses through the rules that the rest of the country was doing its best to follow by driving to a beauty spot called Barnard Castle on the occasion of his wife's birthday, he would have had to resign. But we don't live in that country anymore. If he had subsequently looked you in the eye and claimed that he actually did it to test his eyesight with his wife in the passenger seat and his baby son in the back, he would have had to resign. But we don't live in that country anymore. If the Foreign Secretary were found by a report conducted by his own colleagues in the House of Commons to have betrayed the people of Afghanistan and to have remained on holiday during a retreat that went wrong in just about every imaginable way, he would have had to resign. But we don't live in that country anymore. And I'm doing this off the top of my head. I don't have a list in front of me of the things that once would have happened in the country that we used to live in, because we don't live in that country anymore. I do have a list in front of me. I have a list of clips of Boris Johnson talking about parties. I can remind you how it unfolded. I can remind you how it unravelled. There were no parties. There were parties, but I didn't go to them. There were parties, and I did go to them, but I didn't know they were parties. There were parties, and I did go to them, but I didn't know they were parties, even as I stood with my glass of champagne in the air, addressing the other party-goers, at least one of whom has been fined for attending that gathering, at which the Prime Minister gave a speech. Straight out the door. Sayonara. Adios, goodbye. But we don't live in that country anymore. How do you want to do it today? I think it's contagious, not caring. I think some people who would once have cared have caught the disease from the Prime Minister. Boris Johnson doesn't care about anything. He never has, and he never will. One of the saddest sights is seeing people who presumably once knew better pretend to believe or fall for the idea that this might be the final transgression, that he might finally start pulling his socks up. You saw it, I think, at its boldest after he came home from hospital, having contracted coronavirus, after, of course, boasting about shaking hands with people who had it. And everyone said, oh, I think he's changed now. I think he's going to be more serious. One of the early examples of that, of course, was the efforts to take a grip upon the obesity crisis that is sweeping the country as we speak. But, of course, last week he reverse-ferreted on the legislation that was designed to help address the obesity crisis. This idea that he's going to finish, this idea that he's going to improve, that he's going to finally rise to the challenge. It's incredible, isn't it? It's incredible. Here he is on Wednesday, December the 1st, speaking specifically about the events of, well, this is December the 18th in the previous year. December the 18th being the day upon which a photograph was taken of him having a drink and giving a speech at a party.
As millions of people were locked down last year, was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely during number 10.
It is 11 minutes after 10 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Do you know, there are so many parties and so many clips that I've got them in the wrong order. Should we just play them at random? Let's just play them at random. Keith, spin a number. Seriously, just play one.
What I can tell you is that all the guidelines were observed, continue to be observed, and what I can also tell you is that we're getting on with the job as we have been throughout, of dealing with the priorities of the people, particularly fighting crime.
So was it a party where the guidelines were followed, or was it not a party?
I can tell you that the guidelines were followed at all times.
Well, did you investigate that yourself? Have you satisfied yourself that
I have satisfied myself that the guidelines were followed at all times.
Spin the wheel again, Keith.
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman probably missed what I said at the beginning, but I apologise. I apologise for the impression that has been given that staff in Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that.
How many have we got left? Play another one.
Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
That's the one. where the photograph was taken. Have we got any more?
Numerous parties have now been recorded or reported about in Number 10 during the lockdown last year. And now it emerges that you hosted a Christmas party quiz with groups of people in various rooms in Number 10 when such things were banned. Have you asked Simon Case to investigate you?
I can tell you once again that I certainly broke no rules.
What's happened? 0345 60 60973. Come at it from any angle you want. Talk if you want about the client journalists that facilitate this every single day. Talk about the parliamentary colleagues, the ministers, the cabinet members who facilitate this every single day. Talk about your friends, your family who fall for this still. Or talk about yourself. Talk about what you think has happened. What has happened to our country? How did this happen? I normally deploy a device at this point and suggest that I'm waking up from a coma after 5 years. It wouldn't need even to be 5 years, would it? I mean, Amber Rudd resigned under the last Prime Minister, under Theresa May. Even then, there were standards in place. Even post-Brexit, even after Brexit broke the most fundamental rules of reality by allowing people who denied it to triumph at the ballot box. There were still standards in place. There was still a semblance of decency. There was still justice. If, for example, you were found to have conducted a secret meeting with a foreign government without telling your own Prime Minister, then you would be fired from your ministerial role, as happened to Priti Patel. Of course, in Boris Johnson's government, getting fired for blatant dishonesty and borderline treason, if you want to be technical about it, becomes a qualification for promotion in Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. And I'm doing all this off the top of my head. You'll have things in your mind that I have forgotten. Because when you are drowning in a sea of lies and corruption, you stop noticing. Every time the level rises a little higher, you stop noticing every individual piece of evidence. It just all becomes so encompassing and so complete that you can barely begin to emerge from it. You know, the Times carries a story today that Johnson tried to get her to drop the report. The Times, Rupert Murdoch's Times, reports that Boris Johnson tried to persuade Sue Gray not to publish her report on the grounds that it was all done and dusted now and the Met had made their decisions and what point would be served by it anyway. And yet his cheerleaders will still try to argue today that it doesn't really matter, or that there's no big surprises, or that you shouldn't care. If you shouldn't care about it, why did your hero try to get her not to publish it? Yesterday, the best-selling newspaper in the country carried a story containing a lie that had been dictated to them by Downing Street. The lie being that Sue Gray had instigated the meeting that I just told you about. Later in the day, they had to admit that wasn't true because, whether by accident or design, another minister, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, these titles used to mean something. They used to have heft. They used to have honour. You might not like it. You might not like the system. You might not like the establishment. But if you've ever liked your country, you have to recognise that the great offices of state are part of the glue that binds together our democracy. And every single one of them has now been redeployed as an apologist for a corrupt Prime Minister. The Chancellor of the Exchequer debases himself by his association with Boris Johnson. The Chief Secretary of the Treasury let the cat out of the bag by accident yesterday because he was compelled to defend a Prime Minister who had already lied to the best-selling newspaper in the country. And so when he stated that the meeting had been called by Sue Gray, Downing Street had to retrench, had to reverse ferret, because otherwise she would have gone public with the truth. The Foreign Secretary, the Home Secretary, all of these offices of state that were never truly independent because of collective cabinet responsibility, but would at least have had individual integrity, have been corrupted by the contagion of Boris Johnson's depravity. It's incredible. And it happens throughout history without people noticing. How do you think you end up with an armed insurrection on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., at the behest and instigation of a defeated president who continues to claim that he won, while journalists and politicians queue up to endorse his blatant, proven, known lie? they do it for self-interest. And I resist passionately the conclusion that Johnson is no better than Trump, because that means that we are no better than them. But why else would anybody go along with the latest lies, except self-interest, delusion and vanity? There were parties. He attended loads of them, and now you've got the bloody pictures. What more do you need? 0345 60 60 973. Pretend I've been asleep for 5 years. Give me a call. Tell me what's happened. So pick a principle and pick an example of it from any point in the last 50 years. Whether you want to pick Michael Heseltine resigning from the cabinet on a point of political and personal principle, whether you want to pick Amber Rudd. And I have a little brain worm with Amber Rudd. I called her Amber Heard in front of a room full of Glaswegians the other week, and it's quite an unfortunate slip at the moment. So if I pause before I say Amber Rudd, I did it again. It's because I'm just double checking. I'm not referring to Johnny Depp's ex-wife. I am instead referring to the former cabinet minister, no longer even in Parliament, like so many of the ones that seemed half decent, like the Philip Hammonds and the Rory Stewarts. So pick that if you want. Just when things were done correctly. And you might hate all politicians. You might even have fallen for the lie that they're all as bad as each other. But there was a time when wrongdoing had consequences, and that time has passed. We no longer live in that country anymore. Matt Hancock only resigned because he wanted to. Boris Johnson was prepared to defend him. And Owen Paterson only left Parliament after an abortive and desperate attempt to actually protect him from the consequences of his own corruption. So what comes down from the top of the pyramid is impunity. Wrongdoing in British politics, in the British government, actually, no longer has consequences. And I want you to tell me how that happened. Susan is in Offit in Yorkshire. Susan, what would you like to say?
Oh, good morning, Jane.
Hello, Susan.
When you gave your list of all the reasons why we're not living in the country we used to live in, I actually welled up with emotion. And I just felt that I was grieving for something in the past.
Yes.
And it really did hit a spot for me. I've always taken an interest in politics, and I've never felt like this before. It's just a complete sham. And it's not just Johnson, who I hate, but it's all these MPs around him. Where is the integrity? Where are these people that should be seeing right from wrong? They should be speaking out. They should be sorting this country out, but they're not. They're just compliant. And it's just an awful situation to be in, that we have nobody of any integrity leading this country. But also, when you said that we're living in a different country, there is somebody with integrity, isn't there? Keir Starmer is prepared to stand down. He's showing some integrity.
He is.
But the people who are leading are not.
No, I don't know how that story is going to unfold, but he has shown you his moral compass and shown you where it points, whereas his opposite number clearly doesn't have one, and if he does, it came free with a can of Castrol GTX in 1978, and it broke about 30 years ago. How did this happen, Susan? How did this happen?
I don't know, but I've seen it since about 2012.
Would you go back that far? Do you know, I nearly picked the Olympics for when I fell into my coma. I nearly picked the Olympics.
That was such a wonderful time, wasn't it?
Well, I think it was.
I'm not a fan of Cameron either, but it was such a wonderful time.
I know. And so you've not got a clue. We can't even begin to track the decline.
It's just been a slow slide, and we've come to the bottom of the pit.
Well, every time you say that, he finds another lower level.
How are we going to get out of this? The first thing we have to do is get rid of this monster. He's dragging our country down.
I agree with you, for what it's worth, but I'm even more interested in the first people that you picked up on, the people around him, the colleagues who are now reduced to touring studios, simply wondering how long it's going to be before the thing that they have been defending all morning on the television and the radio is disowned by the man that they're defending. I think the first person it happened to was honest Bob Jenrick, and I remember wondering whether he was actually sitting in the car on the way back from Sky News when he heard on the radio that Downing Street had actually disowned whatever claim it was that he'd been defending on the television all morning. Yesterday it was the turn of Simon Clarke, wasn't it, the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, to defend something that Downing Street later disowned. Grant Shapps is out there today. One report suggests that he's claimed Boris Johnson was mourning his mother at the party where he was photographed, despite the fact that she didn't pass away until 10 months after the party. I'm fascinated by them, actually. You've reminded me that perhaps what this story is about is not so much the corruption at the very pinnacle of the pyramid, but the compliance was the word Susan used. That's a great word, the compliance of the layers below. How has this happened? How did this happen? And when can we have our country back? Thank you, Susan. I would normally apologise if someone tells me that I've upset them or they've been welling up during my introduction, but I don't think you would want me to today, and I'm not going to anyway. Jarlath is in Coal Hill. Jarlath, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. First time caller. Thank you very much for letting me on. Really do appreciate it. I appreciate you've got lots of callers, so I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. I've been able to vote in 3 elections, and I voted Tory. I'm not going to deny that. 2015 and 2017. Couldn't vote for him in 2019. Why? Because of that man.
Right.
That man. I just could not bring myself to vote for him. I fundamentally disagreed with the result of the referendum.
Yeah.
I didn't vote Lib Dem for that reason in 2019, but I just thought I could not vote for them. And I saw this coming, and you asked when this happened.
Yeah.
I believe it happened from 2015 onwards.
Right.
When Jeremy Corbyn got elected as the leader of the Labour Party. Because, and since that point, Labour has been, I appreciate 2017, people still thought that Labour were going to adhere to the result of the referendum. When they became the Remain party in 2019, the landslide happened. And we can't go back from that. But you look at last year's Labour Party conference. Where was the passion? Where was the anger at everything that this country had done?
I hear you, but I don't think that this is on them. I really don't. I mean, for the record, I disagree with your analysis of the 2017 and 2019 elections. I put it exactly the other way round. But that's a conversation for another day. You can't pin this.
Yeah.
I mean, the absence of opposition is part of the problem, but the 2019 landslide was one on a lie. It was one on another massive lie. So
I don't disagree with you.
Right.
I don't disagree with you, James. I don't disagree with you that it wasn't. That it was not. It was.
And people wanted to
lie.
believe the lie. I don't know that anyone could have campaigned successfully against the Get Brexit Done Oven Ready lies. Even those of us that knew they were lies couldn't reach the sides with people who wanted to believe the lies. So I don't know that it's. Yes.
But so I'm just saying. I think that when you have opposition, especially when it was the hung parliament and all the rest of it, I think that when you have that ability there to sort of to deny the deal that was in place, and I'm not saying that it wasn't a bad deal. I'm not saying that Brexit was ever any good.
It's not often I'm a bit wary of relitigating Brexit on the programme. I've got to be honest with you, but I don't know that this is quite the mothership that you think it is on this occasion, and you've taken me right up to the news, but it's out there now. People can pick over the bones of that suggestion. Although I did find, I mean, as I say, I would have done exactly upside down analysis of the last 2 elections to yours, but all voices welcome. I can't see it except as a complicity, not as a lack of opposition. It's the complicity of people who know what they're doing, as is exactly the same with Trump. People taking a full 180 on Trump, from describing him honestly, describing exactly what he is, and then seeing their electoral fortunes tied inextricably to his, and therefore amplifying his lies, repeating his lies, leaving his lies unchallenged. There is a border in the Irish Sea. Boris Johnson did go to parties. You know how long I could go on for with this litany of awfulness. So how does he get away with it is the same question in many ways as the one I've started asking you today, which is what has happened? What has happened to our country? If the Prime Minister can break his own laws and breach the ministerial code and wait to see whether or not he can get away with it again, instead of simply doing the right thing, and Keir Starmer has shown him what the right thing is, and that wouldn't even involve a breach of the ministerial code for Keir Starmer by the Prime Minister. What's happened? Margaret Thatcher? John Major? Pick one. Gordon Brown, Tony Blair. Pick a favourite. David Cameron, Theresa May. Wherever you sit politically, there's someone there that you can pin your colours to. If they had been found to have done any of these things, they would have ceased to be Prime Minister that day. And here we are, torn between wondering whether this is the straw that will break the camel's back or whether this is another storm he will ride out on a sea of obfuscation, lies, and the compliance and the complicity of pretty much every senior politician in the government. That's not fair. There's no pretty much in that sentence. Every senior politician in the government is now complicit in the corruption of Boris Johnson. And that's why they end up on the telly defending it every morning, only to see the thing they've been defending disowned by lunchtime. Oh, but anyway, here's someone from Rupert Murdoch's stable to tell you why you shouldn't care about all this. Or the Daily Mail to tell you why none of this matters. Keir Starmer's curry, foof, huge. Boris Johnson's repeated deceptions? Nah, just move on. No one cares, just a cake. Which bit is most puzzling for you? Is it the contagion of it? Is it the sort of sight of politicians? And you know I've had to give up my genuine and sincere attempts to find warm words to say about some of them, because it's the toll it takes upon you to think of them all as being tarred with the same brush is quite hefty if you live here, and if you are, to use a much maligned word, if you are patriotic, then it's heartbreaking to see what's happening at the very heart of our government at the moment, at the very top of our country. So I tried to find warm words, warm feelings about Matt Hancock. Look how that turned out. I tried to speak warmly of Nadhim Zahawi, I think, most recently, when he became Education Secretary, and look how that's turned out. I'm not sure I ever had nice words to say about Grant Shapps, or Michael Green, or Sebastian Fox, which are, of course, the aliases he used when he was selling get-rich-quick schemes on the internet. Another perfect qualification for cabinet office in Boris Johnson's Brexit Britain. Ben Wallace, he seems not to have fallen foul yet of the curse of O'Brien, but who knows, it's probably only a matter of time. And, of course, the ones that aren't complicit are silent. And silence is complicity. They're all sitting there, watching him, knowing what he is, knowing what he does, knowing how he will respond to the latest revelation, and going along with it. How can you cheer him when he says there were no parties, and then cheer him again when he says, well, there were, but I didn't go to them, and then cheer him again when he says, well, there were, and I did, and I didn't know there were parties, and then cheer him again when you see a photograph of him at the party? What sort of knots do you have to tie yourself into to claim it wasn't a party, when someone else who was there has been fined for attending a party? The Cult Education Institute, and I've taken this straight off Twitter, so I hope it's real, but it's thought-provoking either way. The warning signs. The leader is always right. Number one, the leader is always right, yeah? Number two, criticism of the leader or questioning the leader is considered persecution. Anything the leader does is justified, no matter how harmful it may be. Let the bodies pile high. Let the bodies pile high. Actually, I should have given examples of all of these. The leader is always right. He got all the big calls right, they say, after sending infected people into care homes, while simultaneously claiming they'd put a protective ring around them. He got all the big calls right. Number one, the leader is always right. Number two, criticism of the leader or questioning the leader is considered persecution. I got cabinet ministers calling for me to be sacked for telling the truth about the state of their government, right? So criticism of the leader or questioning the leader is considered persecution. Actually, that's not fair. Only one cabinet minister, as far as I'm aware. Number three, anything the leader does is justified, no matter how harmful it may be. He's doing his best. Let the bodies pile high. He's doing his best. Skip 5 Cobra meetings. He's doing his best. He's doing his best. The leader is the only source of truth. Everybody else is lying. It's fake news, isn't it? Alternative facts. That's where we are now. There were no parties. Well, there were parties. I didn't go to them. Well, there were parties. I did go to them. I didn't know there were parties. Well, there were parties. I did go to them. I got photographed at them with all of the accoutrements of a party in the actual shot. And finally, disciples must be devoted to the leader, never question him. And that holds true from the cabinet right down to your Auntie Doris, doesn't it? Or your Uncle Keith. Don't ring me again, Doris. I'm sorry, I forgot. I wasn't supposed to use your name anymore. Well, you can ring me if you want. Oh, crikey, how rude of me. Go on, explain it to someone who's just woken up. What's happened to our country? Christabel's in Ramsgate. Christabel, what would you like to say?
Well, I woke up in the middle of the night, and at the time it felt like a slight light bulb moment. You might not agree, but I was just thinking that the more that these scandals are happening to him, in a way, is it that the stronger his position becomes? So I just get the sense, and I read something, and I should be able to trace the source, but I can't remember where I saw it. But it's this sort of British bulldog brand. You know, this is kind of, he's impervious. He will survive this. Oh, what a survivor! You know, and in a way, the more these waves come, the more impervious he looks
to whom, though? Because it's. I mean, there must be something psychologically accurate in what you say, mustn't it? And again, it's Trumpish again, isn't it? It's almost as if there's a tipping point where scandal after scandal ceases to add to the burden on the camel's back, and instead almost sort of removes the camel from the picture completely. It's covered in straw now, and the back still hasn't broken. So more straw and more straw and more straw just makes it bigger. Or I understand what you say. It's I don't want to believe it though. If you'll forgive me.
No, God, nor do I. But I just get the sense, and I think
Fifth Avenue. Sorry, I've interrupted you. It's the Fifth Avenue thing. I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and not lose a single vote. That's what you're saying.
Yes, but you know, Jeremy Corbyn can go to Trafalgar Square and.
Why do we keep talking about him? No offence, but it seems profoundly unhelpful at the best of times, let alone today.
Absolutely, I can't believe his name crossed my lips. But the other thing is, having had some experience of it in the past, the gaslighting, you know, the victims of gaslighting, they are in a bit of a cloud. Yes. And, you know, there is a sort of strange complicity in the lie, the beginning, you know, the lie that you have upheld. You know, you're feeling slightly sick, but you can't admit it. You can't climb down. You can't see the wood for the trees. You can't, you know, we all know that you hear somebody talking on the radio who's a politician, and you know when they're lying to you, and you know when they're not, and that's not political. And I'm sick of people saying to me, you just hate Boris. No, I hate everybody who's lying. This isn't even political. I want democracy to be upheld. I listen to Amber Rudd, and you said her too.
Yes, I'm sorry, I've given everyone else that brainworm now, haven't I?
You know, you listen to Philip Hammond, you listen to they're Tories. They're not. I wouldn't vote for them, but they're not lying to me. I know when people are lying to me, and I can hear the ones who are defending him. And God
and they are all lying, and they know that they're lying, and they know that we know that they're lying. But they bank upon the people who accuse you of hating Boris, which is number 2 on the warning signs of a cult from the Cult Education Institute. Criticism of the leader or questioning the leader is considered persecution. So don't look at the facts of your criticism. Don't look at the evidence behind your position. Attack the person holding the position for being disloyal, for being...
Absolutely, and for not being patriotic. How dare they steal our patriotism?
I know. It's unpatriotic to object to the country being corrupted.
Exactly.
That's incredible, right?
Yes.
Thank you, Christopher.
That's where we're at.
That is where we're at. And do you want to have a crack at why?
I think I would go back to the original lie where this all began. And I think anybody who fell for that original lie with the B word. Yeah. And I mean, I'm sure you can trace this back further than that, but for me, that's where it all began. You know,
when you have to actively and deliberately deny what you know to be true, there's a junction, isn't there? There's a fork in the road, and either you file that massive lie and carry on as normal, or you rebuild politics in the shadow of the massive lie. And no one can deny that he's rebuilt British politics in the shadow of the massive lie of Brexit. And the more evidence that it was a lie that emerges, the more the cultish behaviour increases, because the alternative is mental collapse. The Daily Mail today putting a possible impacts of a possible rail strike on its front page. It's quite incredible. The contempt in which you have to hold your readers on a day like today to do something like that is actually beyond my ken. It truly is. But yeah, I'm not going to argue with someone who suggests that Brexit was the beginning of the end, but it's not going to be a satisfactory answer for everybody. And by the end, I mean the beginning of the end of Britain as we knew it, when politicians resigned for wrongdoing. It's not complicated, and it's not party political. When politicians resigned for wrongdoing. We used to live in that country. We lived in that country in 2018. We don't live in it now. What happened? Jim's in Harlow. Jim, what have you got?
Hi, James. Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Welcome aboard.
One to tick off the bucket list, speaking to yourself. So,
top man.
I mean, your previous caller sort of stole quite a lot of the points I was going to make, but I think it does all come back to Brexit. Right. Where I live is a Tory heartland, sort of Essex, blue collar voters and the like. And I think because Boris is the man that got Brexit done, got all those nasty foreigners turned back, got all our straight bananas back.
And that still holds. I mean, if you'd phoned me a year ago, I wouldn't even question you. But is that still holding now?
I would say so. Yeah, it's where I live, there is quite a large Polish community, and I think there is a sense that since Brexit, that the natives not feel more empowered, but I think they just feel that because that we're in charge. I don't know. They just feel a sense of superiority.
Okay. Well, you say what you see. They're going to they're going to have a fit when they see the latest immigration figures.
Yeah. So I think just because of it, he got Brexit was his main aim. He's got it done, and in the eyes of people who voted for it, he can do no wrong. So if if Boris says he didn't go to a party, then he didn't go to a party.
Even though they've got the photograph in front of them, they can still say it's not a party, or he didn't know it was a party, or he didn't go to the party. So we're ignoring the evidence of our eyes and ears, just like George Orwell warned.
He could go for a poo on an ice cream cone and tell them it was a chocolate ice cream, and they would probably believe it. The other thing is as well, you'll.
I'll tell you what, for a debut call, mate, you've gone straight. You've gone straight for the. I don't know what to say. I've never heard that before. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Just going back as well to your previous caller when you said about Jeremy Corbyn, I think as well part of where I live as well with Labour is that the shadow of Jeremy Corbyn still hangs over Labour. I don't think people have moved on, and I don't think
nobody's moved on. The people who were utterly alienated and spooked by him have not moved on, and also the people who refuse to admit that anybody was ever alienated or spooked by him have refused to move on, and that sort of gristle somewhere in British politics, although I don't think the latter constituency exists anywhere outside Twitter, to be honest with you. The people who think, if it wasn't for you pesky kids, he could have been the best Prime Minister we've ever had, that's just Twitter now. But the people who still cast their vote according to the last leader of the Labour Party instead of the current one, that's ballot box. So I'd give you that, although quite why people keep mentioning his name is beyond me at the moment. And I guess, I know, I'm being unfair. Question of how the country's been brought so low. The man who was in charge of opposing it for most of the last 6 years is obviously going to be a factor, I suppose. I was perhaps a little bit ungenerous in criticising people for citing him. 10:46 is the time. How has this happened? What about the complicity of it? Because we've talked about gaslighting, I use this very advisedly. This is a metaphor, all right? But whenever I read about domestic violence, I think those of us who are blessed with never having been touched by it are often confused by people who keep going back into abusive environments. And let's work upon the proviso that they don't have to. I know a lot of people feel they have no choice for material reasons, accommodation reasons. But the belief that they're going to change, that weird thing becomes somehow psychologically dependent. You have to believe that they're going to change. How I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud because I cannot solve the mystery of how our country has been brought so low so fast. 2018, ministers would resign for wrongdoing. Probably 2019, actually. I'll have to double check. But definitely 2018. 2022, you have got more chance of seeing a pig fly past the third floor window of this studio than you have of seeing a minister resign for wrongdoing. And of course, whatever you want to say about a minister in general becomes doubly, triply, quadruply true when you talk about the Prime Minister. So what happened? How did we see... And listen, whatever you think about Brexit or Boris Johnson, you can have a go at this because you can't deny where we are now. We live in a country where it doesn't matter what they do, they will never resign for wrongdoing. So what's happened? Is it your fault for cheering them and tugging the forelock so hard? Is it your fault that you've created a political class now, which is all the things you were supposed to hate when you voted to leave the European Union? The power of unelected bureaucrats, absolute corruption of a moral, and looking at some of the COVID contracts, quite possibly financial nature as well, and no resignations ever. Why not? No one's used the F word yet. We've had the B word pop up a few times, and even the C word, but no one's used the F word yet. The F word is, of course, my own invention. And I wonder, my friend Wayne, who is lives in Basildon. He says, my dude, because he likes to cling on to the notion that he can still use the language of the youth. You have no idea how deep the right-wing rhetoric holds the steering wheel of debate in the home counties. Johnson could have a dog poo in one hand and people would still shake it. It's beyond cultish. It's all down to media manipulation, but never say sorry. Never say sorry is part of the spell, I guess, isn't it? And that just made me think of footballification, because you'd think, well, look, there's so much evidence here, but you don't stop supporting it. And that's like football. That's not like politics. Or it's not like how many of us approach politics. You know? If your team is managed by a disaster, you don't give up on your team in football, do you? If your team get relegated season after season after season, or if your team has bribed every referee in the country and they never lose a game, but what you're watching makes absolutely no sense, even then many people don't take their scarves off or put down their rattles. It is just that weaponisation, and I think Brexit did this. That weaponisation of feelings and emotions. It's almost religious, isn't it? When you had people shouting chants that they didn't understand, like "Let's go WTO," and he somehow harnessed that because he's never looked a bandwagon in the mouth, and people can't get off it now. I guess I don't know, but then I once again keep coming back to the people, and I'm probably being frightfully naive, just expecting more of politicians, expecting more of senior Conservatives. I can probably name off the top of my head the ones that have taken a stand against him. Roger Gale, once again, calls today for him to go. Even Brexit hardman Steve Baker, I think, is holding the line and calling for him to go. I don't know whether that makes them principled in Baker's case or just opportunist. He seems to be sort of one of nature's hecklers, doesn't he? Just loves hurling rotten tomatoes from the sidelines at whoever's on the stage, even when it's someone from his own party. But you're going to take that over the forelock tuggers and the sycophants who are defending the indefensible on television every morning and then being disowned by Downing Street at lunchtime. 10:55 is the time. Christopher is in Crewe. Christopher, how did this happen?
Hi, I think it's sort of an arrogance on our part, on like the country's part. See, I think what happened was we sort of looked elsewhere in the world, like to the Middle East and to Russia and stuff like that, and we went, well, our system's better than theirs. We have liberties and all that kind of stuff. But I think because we looked at that, when we saw, agreeably less severe, not as bad things happening in our country, we just looked at it and went, oh, it's fine.
Because it's happening here. It can't be what happens there. It must be a different sort of thing, even though it looks exactly the same.
Yeah, but that's obviously not how morality works. All because they did something bad doesn't mean when something bad happens here that it's not, bad and we shouldn't sort it out. But I think because of that mentality, and I don't think anyone's at fault. I think it's just normal human nature to think that way. It's slowly creeped.
I bet it's the same the other way around, isn't it? That's why Putin talks about the moral corruption of the West. Putin's become the king of the anti-woke. His rhetoric and his... Go on.
Yeah, I believe it's called whataboutism, isn't it?
Whataboutery.
What about this?
I don't know if that is quite it, but let's not split hairs. I presume so. In Middle Eastern countries, particularly if they're Islamist, they think that we're all corrupt and morally bereft. Putin talks constantly about wokeness and the corruption of the West. So there's arrogance wherever totalitarianism gets a little foothold, and yet here, our arrogance would think, well, no, it can't be. We can't be cultish here. We're British.
Yeah, but I think there is an upside to what's happened.
Go on.
I heard you earlier, you said, I think this is a wake-up call for us. I think because this has happened, I think come the next general election, I truly believe that this attitude there won't be enough of it to stop, to stop us trying to fix the system.
Now, mate. Look, if it wasn't for the coronavirus, Trump probably would have won. And he'd turned lying into, second nature, hadn't he? First nature, actually. Just the truth ceased to matter at all. And this is, I think I'm about to be arrogant in the way that you described. This thing I think is noble, this resistance of the idea that Trump and Johnson are morally equivalent. I resist it because this is Britain and I live here. And that's arrogance, that's exceptionalism. I can't believe that Johnson is as comfortable lying as Donald Trump is, and yet all the evidence is in front of me, and I'm trying to talk myself out of the conclusion that the evidence is leading me to, out of what I'd like to call patriotism, but it is actually arrogance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
But I don't know. I'm young. I'm hopeful. I have to be. So, if we've had worse sort of like political ideas, just
but not in Downing Street.
Yeah, not in Downing Street. But if other countries can get over, these, worse political ideas, then surely we can.
Yeah,
and I hope that's not part of this arrogance that I just talked about.
No, I mean, as Paul says, arrogance pushes intelligence out of the window and kicks common sense down the stairs. So that's the answer. The answer is intelligence and common sense. But of course, quite often the real liars, the absolutely shameless liars, claim that those attributes are theirs, exclusively theirs, It's just good common sense when it's not. It's base bigotry and dishonesty. I mean, you're onto something there. So it's not a new development. It's always been bubbling under. The rule Britannia waves the rules school of thought had just never been allowed to completely flourish in the way that it has in the combination of the two Bs, the Boris and the Brexit combination. Phones are going nuts, which means there's still a big appetite to talk about this. And you won't be surprised to learn I share that desire, so we won't change course anytime soon. I would, though, like a little bit more on the complicity of it, because, I mean, I know about vanity and I know about ambition, and that will be, no doubt, large parts of the answer. But you look at a Zahawi or a Sunak or a Shapps, and they're not in it for the money, obviously. What are they in it for? And how much, well, is there any limit to how much they will take? But not for the first time, I find the iPaper a particularly, good chronicler of the reality that some newspapers, chiefly the Daily Mail and the Sun as well, they don't put it on the front page either, continue to try to deny. Boris Johnson, they report, is waiting to find out the reaction from Tory MPs and the public. How many times have I told you he will never act on principle? He will always wait and see until his options have been narrowed. This, I think, we touched on this again yesterday. I'm not sure, I may be wrong, in which case I'll probably be able to hear you shouting at the radio. I think this doesn't get explained enough. He never makes a decision until he has no choice. I imagine when he left his wives, it was only done when the bags were packed by them and thrown out of the front door. He never makes a decision unless he's got no choice, unless it's forced upon him, or unless there's no time left. For example, he had to decide which column to send to the Daily Telegraph, the one he'd written explaining why leaving the European Union would be stupid, or the one full of lies claiming that it would be a good idea. At some point, probably about 8 o'clock that night, he has to send it, because otherwise it won't be in the next day's paper. So he will postpone and postpone and postpone and postpone for as long as he can, until the decision is almost taken for him by events. And of course, what usually happens is that the longer the postponement, the more the emotional environment dilutes. The less angry people get, the less involved people are, the less they care. So that's the process by which him not caring about anything becomes contagious, and those that criticise him actually become ridiculous. If someone really doesn't care, imagine you've got a bloke standing in front of you and you're screaming truth at him about his own indiscretions and his own transgressions. You're working on a sort of reciprocal code of honour. The stuff you're shouting is powerful to you because you presume that it matters to everybody. But if the bloke you're shouting at doesn't care about lying or adultery or presiding over avoidable deaths or imperiling the peace process in Northern Ireland, if he genuinely doesn't care about any of that, he almost has this power to turn you into the bloke in the street shouting at the moon. If the person so you think you're shouting inalienable truths and undeniable facts that matter. It is disgusting to lie to voters. It is disgusting to cheat on your wife like it's going out of fashion. It is disgusting to imperil the peace process in Northern Ireland. It is disgusting to prorogue Parliament unlawfully. It is disgusting to send Jacob Rees-Mogg to Balmoral to lie to the Queen. It is disgusting to try to rescue the career of, or to avoid punishment for Owen Paterson after he's found to have acted corruptly. It is disgusting to not tell us what intelligence advice you received about putting the son of a KGB agent into the actual House of Lords. It is disgusting to let your independent advisor on ministerial standards walk the plank rather than act upon the report he has published, or given to you rather, showing that the Home Secretary Priti Patel bullies colleagues. It is disgusting to do all of these things. It is disgusting to attend parties at Downing Street when the rest of us couldn't attend funerals. It is disgusting to deny that there were any parties when you know that there were because we got pictures of you at them. It is disgusting to let junior colleagues take the flak, carry the can, shoulder the burden of punishment for the actions of their superiors. It is all disgusting. But you look mad if the person you're shouting at doesn't care. All right, I look mad if the person I'm shouting at doesn't care. I'm shouting at a microphone. He doesn't care. He doesn't care about any of it. So the critics end up looking mad. Hugo Rifkind in the Times today explores this theme very cleverly. And it's true, isn't it? I think he uses the word shrill. The critics end up looking shrill. It's win-win. If you let it slide, he wins. If you persuade yourself that you don't care, or you listen to charlatans telling you not to care, he wins. And if you get cross, and you shout the odds, and you point out the catalogue of calumnies, he also wins because you look bonkers because he doesn't care. And that absence of care is the next contagion. First, the corruption is contagious, and it corrupts the entire cabinet and much of the country. And then the not caring becomes contagious, and it corrupts the entire cabinet and much of the country. You are being told not to care about this stuff, about a Prime Minister who cannot lie straight in bed. You are being told not to care about a Prime Minister who lied about a border in the Irish Sea, imperilled the peace process purely through personal ambition. You're being told not to care about a Prime Minister who reportedly wanted to let the bodies pile high rather than put a bit of a tightener on his corporate sponsors. Don't care. So first the corruption becomes contagious, then the not caring becomes contagious. And that's where we are today. And it's very strange some days, isn't it, to take 2-3 steps back from the screen and see the entire picture instead of just the tiny pixels that you can discern when your nose is pressed up to the screen. It's all there. We're absolutely screwed for the foreseeable future. I don't know what would even happen next if enough Conservative MPs found what passes for their conscience and actually did submit the letters of no confidence. And if he did lose a vote of no confidence, what would happen next? Because all of this is built upon the lies of 2016 and the subsequent lies of oven-ready deals and getting Brexit done. And until someone's prepared to disown that from within the Conservative ranks or the Labour ranks, the corruption continues. And the exhortation not to care becomes ever more irresistible, because if you do care, you'll go crackers. If you do care, and the people in charge don't, or the man in charge doesn't, where does that leave you? It leaves you once again with Orwell, actually, as I speak about going crackers. There is truth and there is untruth. And if you can hold on to the truth, even if you are the only one, you will not go mad. And yet some days it feels like it might be the other way round. You almost envy the people who are on the side of the corruption and the not caring, because that must be so. I think back to the first caller today. Was it Jill? Talking about welling up, genuine emotional jeopardy, pain, trauma, because you love the country in which you live and you want the best for it, and the country is being driven by people who are denigrating it and debasing it on the world stage, but also at home every day. It's incredible, isn't it? This, says my unsigned text, this is how, I've lost it now, this is how narcissists operate. This is how people who have fallen for that's how people feel when they're in a relationship with a narcissist, where we are now living in the reality of being led by a narcissist. It is indeed crazy making. That's a nice word, or crazing. 11 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I suppose also One can feel sorry for people who think they enjoy this. You remember that caller we took years ago? It was more about Trump, I think, than Johnson. I love him because I know he's lying, but I love it because it upsets people like you. And I don't think we spend enough time thinking about them. I mean, how do you end up like that? How do you end up so utterly, utterly miserable and unhappy with your life that the idea of the people you think are happy being rendered unhappy by a lying politician is a win? I love it. I love it. It's upsetting all the right people. I love it. What has happened to you? What's your life like? If that's a win. Oh, I hate those people over there. They look happy and secure and replete and content. And I'm so categorically and completely not that if a politician comes along who's going to upset decent, happy people, then I am going to vote for him again and again and again because I hate decent, happy people. And I love the idea of someone who's going to come along and hurt them. And that's the appeal of Trump in a nutshell. But is it the appeal of Johnson? I don't know. I don't know whether it is. Anyway, the photographs that the editor of the Daily Mail decided not to publish on the front page today, and indeed the editor of The Sun, although one never knows whether that decision is taken by the editor or by the owner. In both cases, actually. The party that was photographed is the party that Catherine West is asking the Prime Minister about in this clip, and the party which he is denying the existence of. So the party in the photographs that some people have the absolute front to tell you not to care about, that's the one being spoken about here in the actual House of Commons on the 8th of December last year.
Will the Prime Minister tell the House whether there was a party in Downing Street on the 13th of November?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no, but I'm sure that whatever happened, the guidance was followed and the rules were followed at all times.
How could anybody have been in a room full of people and bottles at that point? We're talking about the 13th of November 2020. I hope that date doesn't have a particular resonance for you, but I know that it will for some people. How could you have been in a room full of boozing people and thought that the guidelines have been followed at all times? It is literally impossible. We were keeping 2 meters away from each other in the bloody lift in this building at the time. Seriously, we weren't using the little lift, and there was 2 at a time in the big lift. How could anybody have stood in a room full of people boozing? More bottles there than there is in my recycling on an average Wednesday morning. More bottles in that photograph. And he's standing there telling everyone that the guidelines have been observed at all times. And of course, the other thing about Johnson, the final piece of the jigsaw, when you move from the corruption becoming contagious to the complacency, we could call it, the not caring becomes contagious. The final piece of the jigsaw in many ways with him is, well, what is it? It's the confidence, isn't it? It's the knowledge. It's the certainty that we can never prove what's actually happened in his head. So you know he's lying. This is the Barnard Castle model. You know they're lying, but you can't actually prove it. I didn't realise it was a party. Mate, there are bottles everywhere. You've got bunting round your neck in one of the other photos we saw. Oh, yes, I know, all of that, but I didn't know. There's a bloody great cake in front of you. Yes, but I didn't know it was a party. There's a cake in front of you. Yes, but I didn't know it was a party. There's champagne everywhere. Yes, but I didn't know it was a party. You'd almost be like, there's strippers in the room. There's bunting falling out of the ceiling. There's glitter balls on every surface. You've got, I don't know, you've got Jay-Z's doing the halftime performance. Oh, I didn't know it was a party. You've got party poppers. You've got tinsel. You've got fancy dress. People are in fancy dress. I didn't know it was a party. I thought it was a work meeting. And you can't prove it. You can't get inside his head and press print. And that is where it always ends up. Always ends up there. Barnard Castle. Absolute cobblers. Absolute cobblers. You knew it, they knew it, we all knew it. They knew that we knew it. But we couldn't prove. We can't get inside his head and actually demonstrate that all the nonsense about getting his eyes tested was nonsense. And that's where we are now. He will claim at every turn, in response to every question, that he didn't know it was a party. And they might even try to claim that because he wasn't fined for being there, the Metropolitan Police agree with him. That's a lie. Because, of course, someone else who was there was fined, which means it was an illegal gathering. And he was there. And he somehow gets off the hook for being in attendance, but the lie to the House of Commons was that guidance was observed, when it wasn't. I didn't know, he will say. And you can't get inside his brain and press print, and that's why, or that is how, at every other turn, when any other politician would have walked the plank, done the decent thing, fallen on their sword, that's why he may well walk away from this one as well, by lying. And it's contagious. And eventually it infects entire countries. Should we spin the wheel again? Shall we do a quick wheel spin and then get back to the calls? I'm asking what's happened. How did this happen to our country? How did we become a place where, and you can leave all the rest of it aside, although I tend not to, where politicians no longer have to resign when they do anything wrong? That's all. That's all. How have we become that place? I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Drop the fourth one because we played it just before the break. Just play a random clip of Boris Johnson blowing smoke up the country's backside.
What I can tell you is that all the guidelines were observed, continue to be observed, and what I can also tell you is that we're getting on with the job, as we have been throughout, of dealing with the priorities of the people, particularly fighting crime.
So was it a party where the guidelines were followed, or was it not a party?
I can tell you that the guidelines were followed at all times.
Well, did you investigate that yourself? Have you satisfied yourself that
I have satisfied myself that the guidelines were followed at all times.
And another one.
As millions of people were locked down last year, was a Christmas party thrown in Downing Street for dozens of people on December the 18th?
Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, what I can tell the right honourable gentleman is that all guidance was followed completely during number 10.
And another one, please.
Numerous parties have now been recorded or reported about in number 10 during the lockdown last year. And now it emerges that you hosted a Christmas party quiz with groups of people in various rooms in number 10 when such things were banned. Have you asked Simon Case to investigate you?
I can tell you once again that I certainly broke no rules.
And do you remember when he was sickened?
Mr. Speaker, I think the right honourable gentleman probably missed what I said at the beginning, but I apologise. I apologise for the impression that has been given that Stark and Downing Street take this less than seriously. I'm sickened myself and furious about that.
It is 21 minutes after 11, and I'm haunted by that Alexander Hamilton quote that I opened the show with today. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. What do you think they stand for? Maybe we could tempt a few fans or supporters onto the programme. What do you think they stand for? I'll read you this from Mike in Chesham. With respect, you can't just claim all Boris and Trump supporters are revelling in the tears of left-wing voters. I never use the word left-wing in that context, for the simple reason, Mike, that the people you're describing don't know what they mean when they use it, unless it just means not racist. That's just so lazy. You're basically saying that anyone with different political views to yourself are incapable of basing their views on political agendas. I'm really not. I'm saying that they're capable of not caring about integrity and politicians no longer having to resign when they do something wrong. That's why it's not left-wing or right-wing. So I might do that, Mike, and you can ring in. What are those ideas? What are those political agendas? What does this Conservative Party stand for? Because if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And it seems to me, as I watch the ministers tour the studios, that they are proving, they're living, walking, breathing proof of that. They'll fall for it. They will defend anything now because they don't stand for anything. Lewis is in Putney. Lewis, what would you like to say?
I've got three things to say.
Number one.
How does it make me feel? Contempt, not only for the government and Johnson, but also for friends and family who still vote Conservative, annoyingly. But that.
But are they voting for him, or are they just voting? I mean,
I'll move on to that on my final point.
Yeah, go on.
Second point is, when did it change? 2014 European elections, when UKIP sort of won.
Okay.
And why? It's because the Conservative Party now is more concerned with winning than it is with what they win. So my friend, the key friend who I'm going to refer to, he's a card-carrying Conservative Party member.
Yeah.
He's a lawyer. And we've spoken a couple of times, James, and I'm more of a scientist.
Sure.
But I have a sort of fundamental relationship with science, where what is the science? What is correct? And if it, and he was so angry about Gina Miller taking the government to court and winning. And I was like, but it's the law. That's what you do. You're a lawyer. That's, you have that, your feelings shouldn't come into it. Yeah. And he was so upset about losing to this. And this is what I was going to say is it's more about the winning now. Like with Brexit, as you were saying, drinking Ramona tears, what have you won? They don't care because they won. And I think this comes about mainly because of Blair.
Go on.
And because he's such he's a die-in-the-wall Conservative. His parents are Conservatives. He's a card-carrying Conservative. And when Blair won 3 elections in a row and they couldn't do anything about it, even when Labour, the Conservatives were at their worst, and John Major still, he's so used to winning as a party, the Conservatives. They are the party of government. And when they lost 3 in a row, and let's face it, if it wasn't for a global recession, they'd have lost the Brown.
Sure. Or if Clegg
I voted Conservative in 2010.
Right.
So, you can blame me. I was in a key swing seat, actually.
I don't think we need to lay it all on you, Lewis.
Well, yeah, there's a few other things that went down between them. But that's why I think that...
So that's football. That's footballification, then. That's a form of footballification, isn't it? They don't even know what the prize is. It's just so essential to win. And then you say to win what? And actually it's a category error. It doesn't matter what you're winning. You're winning, exactly. And I can tell that I'm winning because you lost and you're really sad about it. And I think we've all lost, but the fella who's in Downing Street's wearing the same colour scarf as your friend's wearing, so it doesn't matter whether we've all lost, he's won.
And that's why Boris Johnson's key, because he wins, and they can't win without him. And he won in London when it was a Labour city.
Well, I voted for him then while we're doing the Mayor Culpars. While we're doing the Mayor Culpars, I voted for him in 2008. So there's no condescension involved in wondering how people can end up doing it, because I did it myself.
But I think, well, that's the funny thing, is actually if you went back and asked Lewis in 2010, his political views, they'd be completely different.
Well, so would the secret barristers, actually. And I wonder whether you could possibly insert this week's full disclosure into your friend's inbox, because that's a fascinating examination of the approach to law and indeed politics and right-wing rhetoric that your friend displays. And the secret barrister has been on quite the journey, very unexpectedly, as detailed in their new best-selling book. But... yeah, that's amazing, isn't it? You're a lawyer. You should be in favour of the rule of law. But we've got an Attorney General. We've got a Foreign Home Secretary who thinks that lawyers are activists. Remember that front page? It was a month ago, was it? If that. And it was about how it's all lawyers that are going to scupper the Rwanda plan. Well, that's absolutely impossible. The only thing that could scupper the Rwanda plan in a legal context is it being illegal.
Well, that's why judges would be the enemy of the people.
Well, that's, yeah.
If they enforce the law as it is.
So, you're younger than me.
Thank you.
How it's not an opinion, it's just counting. What role does the media play in your friend's worldview?
That's a funny one, because I think, because he's a very active Conservative member.
Right.
I would say less in some respects. I think
I thought you might.
He's much more about the party line in some respects. So I don't think he gets the Telegraph, I guess, but that's
right.
I don't think he'd read the Mail or anything.
No,
I don't think
he's not gone for the complete.
It gives you arguing points, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, the Telegraph make no bones about what should be on the front page. So they pressure on Met over pictures of PM raising a toast in Number 10 is perhaps a minor diversion, where the pressure really is on the PM, but at least the picture is there, and the police are being asked why Johnson avoided a COVID fine. So Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, Boris Johnson is to the Daily Telegraph what Dennis the Menace is to the Beano, and they're calling it now, albeit a little bit quietly. So, I'm just fascinated by it personally because of my own background, I guess, in newspapers. Just wonder how much influence they have, and we can have a break out of it on the programme by not being agenda-led, not taking our talking points and our lead from newspapers. We do it sometimes, but I haven't yet worked out a way to do it every day. Lewis, thank you. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. I'm kind of short of slots on my switchboard, but if you were to ring in afresh now, I am interested in the Complicity. What do you think? I mean, let's just pick... Should we pick Grant Shapps as an example? Or is that a bad example? Because he's always been really shiny and plausible. But even back when he was selling get-rich-quick schemes on the internet using false names. That shouldn't land, should it? Really? That shouldn't just be an off-the-cuff little quip that I'm supremely confident I can deliver without running risk of any libel breaches. That shouldn't happen. He shouldn't now be a Secretary of State. He used to do what, James? He used to sell get-rich-quick schemes on the internet using a false name. There's even pictures of him wearing a name badge that isn't his name. That's Grant Shapps for you. That's how you get ahead in Boris Johnson's... Not even Boris Johnson's. He was in positions of prominence long before Boris Johnson got into Downing Street. So maybe that's not a good example, because if you're in the business of flogging get-rich-quick schemes using a false name, it's probably not a massive mystery how you can end up on the telly every morning defending the indefensible and then being disowned by lunchtime. You are chasing different foxes from the rest of us, Grant Shapps, or Sebastian Fox, as he sometimes used to call himself. So who are we going to pick? Who do you want to pick? Should we pick Nadhim Zahawi? Why does he do it? 0345 6060 973. Why did they do it? Why do they defend what they know to be indefensible? I have abandoned the habit of trying to find senior Conservatives about whom I can say nice things, because it turned into a curse. But Zahawi's always struck me as a solid guy. Yeah, don't laugh and get tribal yourself, because footballification cuts both ways. He's always struck me as a solid guy. He's always seemed thoughtful. He's always seemed intelligent. I was told by several teachers when he got his feet under the desk at education, first thing he started to do was undo much of the damage done by Gavin Williamson. We haven't even mentioned him yet today. There's so many of them. It's like Zulu, isn't it? You look up and there's just incompetent after incompetent after incompetent after incompetent coming over the hill. So, why does he do it? And I'd like a sophisticated answer, something a little bit more nuanced than because he wants to be Prime Minister one day. I don't know. Why does he do it? I'm going to give some special love to everyone who's correcting my Alexander Hamilton quote, because I love you, and I would have done that, I think. I think the original quote is, if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything, right? But of course, after it had been turned into poetry by Lin-Manuel Miranda in the superlative musical Hamilton, it's if you stand for nothing, Burr, what will you fall for? I'm not going to sing it to you. So you're not correcting my quote when you quote the musical to me, because that is an adaptation of the original quote for musical purposes. So obviously it sounds better because it scans. It's got the rhythm of the most magnificent musical you could ever hope to see. If you stand for nothing, Burr, what do you fall for? So anyway, thank you for that, because that made me smile. And there's quite a lot of you who've done it as well. So I should have just gone with the lyric, shouldn't I? But if I'd gone with the lyric, lots of people would have texted to say, actually, James, I think you'll find that that's the lyric from the musical rather than what Alexander Hamilton reportedly or reputedly wrote or said. So you just can't win sometimes. Apparently, if you are in New York, you can go to the place. Have I told you this before? I read it recently. You can go to the place where Alexander Hamilton died. You can rest your head against the rock that he rested his head against as he passed away after a duel with Aaron Burr, the guy in the lyric. If you stand for nothing, Burr, what will you fall for? I don't know why I find that kind of thing so magical, and I fully appreciate that not everybody does, but there's something about... I don't know what it is. There's something about that kind of detail that just absolutely entrances me. Anyway, 25 to 12 is the time. Why do they do it? Let's play Nadhim Zahawi from yesterday, and then I'll bring you up to date with what happened an hour or two later.
You say you don't know, but do you not know who called the meeting because you didn't ask the question or because Number 10 didn't tell you the answer?
No, but if Sue Gray decides that, when she publishes, she decides... how she's going to deliver her final report.
That's a completely different question.
But what I'm saying to you is, ultimately, there are two facts that your viewers need to know. One, the Prime Minister did not, would never intervene in this report. He wants Sue Gray to publish her report. Secondly, I've worked with Sue Gray. I know Sue Gray. Sue Gray's integrity is beyond question.
So you're asking our viewers to accept that the Prime Minister did not intervene in this report, right?
Absolutely right.
Right, so we now know that the Prime Minister did instigate a meeting with Sue Gray. to discuss the report, and it is now reported in the Times today, which is the paper of record, that he sought to persuade her not to publish it. Why does Nadhim Zahawi do this to himself? Never mind the rest of the country, never mind you and me. Just talk me through it. Why does he do it? See, it's not the money, and that's not a crass or a cynical answer. You look at some of the people who've gone into bat for Russian oligarchs, and there's no mystery. You can turn your conscience off if you're earning 10 million quid a year. I wonder if there's... they say every man has his price, don't they? So whether that's true or not is a question for the ages. But it's not money. This is a fella who's... You remember when the expenses scandal broke and he got into trouble for claiming money to heat his stables? You don't have heated stables if you've got financial problems. So, I mean, some of it, vanity, pride, power, but then but how can your vanity accommodate that level of debasement? You see, I would have thought that to be vain you need to be arrogant, and to be arrogant you need to have quite high self-regard, and to have quite high self-regard would mean that there's no earthly way you would countenance shaming yourself, humiliating yourself in public like that for somebody else. So then Johnson probably is part of the answer. Why does Nadhim Zahawi do this to himself? Why do they all do it to themselves? Why does Grant Shapps do it to himself? See, a lot of people mock Nadine Dorries for the way she looks at Boris Johnson, some photographs that capture a look of almost puppyish adoration, which is a little unseemly perhaps, but the behaviour of people like Nadhim Zahawi is every bit as fawning, every bit as inexplicable. Why does he do it? Have another listen. This is from Sunday Morning on Sky News. I played it yesterday. Sorry, I got my dates the wrong way round. Why does he do it to himself? And a special apology first to Stephen J in Milton Keynes, who says I should have issued a spoiler alert before revealing that Aaron Burr kills Hamilton. Mate, it happened about 300 years ago. I mean, it's not... I know you're joking, and it's a very good joke, but no. So here he is, Nadhim Zahawi, Secretary of State for Education. Imagine that. What a great job. Imagine phoning your mum and telling her you've been made Secretary of State for Education. Oh, it's really wonderful, son. I'm so proud of you. What are you going to do at work today? Oh, I'm going to go on live television and defend the lies of Boris Johnson that will then be revealed to be lies before I've even got home. And your mum says, why, son? Why are you doing that? My mum would. Why are you doing that? My dad, God. My dad certainly would have done when he was like, why on earth? He said to me once, he said, why on earth are you going to Belfast to debate drugs with Peter Hitchens? He's a columnist in the Mail on Sunday, and I couldn't answer it. I was around about then that I stopped thinking that appearing on telly was a very impressive... Dad said, oh, I'm mowing the lawn later. Do you want to come and watch? This was in response to the suggestion that you might want to watch me on the telly. Why are you doing that, son? Don't know, Dad. Everyone else seems to think it's a big deal. Why are you doing that, Nadhim? Why are you doing that? Here he is, Sunday Morning, live television.
You say you don't know, but do you not know who called the meeting because you didn't ask the question or because Number 10 didn't tell you the answer?
No, but if Sue Gray decides that, when she publishes, she decides, how she's going to deliver her final report.
That's a completely different question.
But what I'm saying to you is, ultimately, there are two facts that your viewers need to know. One, the Prime Minister did not, would never intervene in this report. He wants Sue Gray to publish her report. Secondly, I've worked with Sue Gray. I know Sue Gray. Sue Gray's integrity is beyond question.
So you're asking our viewers to accept that the Prime Minister did not intervene in this report, right?
Absolutely right.
Except he did. Full stop. So why do people like Nadhim Zahawi do this to themselves? And I don't know whether you heard... I can't remember who it was, so forgive me, but some people have started claiming that Sky News is left-wing. Incredible, really, but that might be why, because remember that Rule 2, warning sign number 2 of a cult from the Cult Education Institute is criticism of the leader or questioning the leader is considered persecution. So Sophie Ridge there on Sky News really doing the job that some other political editors... Perhaps not Theo Ushwood, God forbid anyone thinks I'm talking about him. I'm talking about a recently uninstalled political editor would have done well to learn from how you actually speak truth to power like that, or ask difficult questions rather than ask questions designed solely to protect your access to these senior politicians. And then, of course, all the headbangers start claiming Sky News is left-wing because they're daring to ask questions. And the BBC is under attack from the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport for the same thing. And so all of these things, they all tie into the same story, which is a corruption of a country, a decline of a country. So I don't think Nadhim Zahawi wants to see Britain become a sort of a pale, corrupt shadow of its former self. So why does he go along with the man who's turning it into precisely that? I do not know. And how did this happen? How did we end up on this path to such abject and complete shame, where politicians no longer have to resign, whatever the wrongdoing may be? Mark's in Enfield. Mark, sorry to keep you. What would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm glad you added that last little bit at the end, because that was the reason for my original call.
Good.
But I'm more than happy to offer my opinions on the complicity. As opposed to your previous caller, I think it goes back further than the European elections. I think that particularly the US and the UK had a fundamental shift in 2008 with the financial crash, where Obama decided to stimulate the economy, and the Tory party from 2010 onwards, with the complicity of the right-wing press, went in the opposite direction. And I think that led to the European elections, it led to Brexit. So that's when I think it all started. Austerity
is where it began. What was the ideological justice? Because, I mean, I love it. I'm sure you've heard me steal Alexi Sale's brilliant line that austerity was the policy that essentially meant that the international financial crisis caused largely by the banking industry could be fixed by closing down libraries in Wolverhampton. The notion they were terrified of state intervention and state spending to protect the economy.
No, I think it goes deeper than that.
Go on.
I think that there has been a fundamental wealth grab. I'm middle management,
right.
doing reasonably well. I'm applying for jobs now at the same basic salary as I was applying for 8-9 years ago.
Yes.
And even though the US are talking about wage stagnation, I think the US's wages have gone up on average about 20,000 over the last 10 years, and ours have flatlined. But we're not told that, because with the complicity of the right-wing press, it's always blame them, blame them, blame them.
Who are they blaming at the moment? Because I'm fascinated by this, and I think your analysis is solid, but who are they blaming at the moment for things going wrong?
Well, I think that they're treading water. I think that they can survive at the moment on the crest of a COVID wave.
Woke. They're blaming woke.
They'll blame woke. Yeah. They'll blame woke. But I think in terms of the fundamentals of the economy, they've got. I think enough people will forgive them. I mean, But
why? Because you're describing a wealth grab from the very, very top, and the numbers support you. Mm-hmm. Even over COVID, the numbers are chilling, actually. The amount of huge fortunes that increased while everybody else was at best treading water. Why do people go along with it then?
Because they don't see it.
Right.
Because
because of the blame thing. So your life's not going very well. It's all the fault of that Romanian builder over the road. It's got nothing to do with the people in charge.
As long as the Tories are giving the poorest people in society somebody else to look down on, then that's an old Tory trick, right?
I know that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's what they do. Don't look up at your CEO who's had a 2,000% pay increase in the last 5 years. Look down at the people that are coming and taking the lower level jobs, because they're the ones that are really after you.
And Johnson becomes the sort of Uber CEO, not Uber, because that's a company now, isn't it? Not just a German word, but he becomes like the CEO of what you describe. I mean, they all bend the knee to him because.
Well, that talks to the complicity.
Yes.
And I think there's one cause, two different reasons. I think Johnson's the cause. He's shown with his purge of sensible Tories, Dominic Grieve, there is no room in the party unless you're loyal to the chief.
And loyal to the lie about Brexit as well. We can't ignore the reason for all of this.
But I do think there's two reasons. I think someone like Nadhim Zahawi, who's a intelligent, professional politician, when you get to that level of politics, you have to accept ministerial responsibility. You know that you're going to have to defend things that sometimes don't sit right with you, because that's part and parcel of being a minister.
Right, yes.
And I think he's in that position. He's doing what is necessary as a minister Now, previously, you've always had to take that line as ministerial collective responsibility. It's very different now because you're defending straight-up lies. But I think that's the mindset that somebody such as him would go into that position. I'm going to stay here because I want to do more good than harm. I am better here than not being here, because if I don't do this, there's a whole bunch of BNP-like politicians on the back bench.
So this is a generous reading of Nadhim Zahawi's behaviour. I like it. I like it because I want to be generous. I mean, I don't want things to be as bleak as they sometimes appear. So he's thinking, I need to be near to the bloke with his hand on the rudder just to make sure that someone else isn't near to the hand on the rudder, and B, hopefully to dissuade him from steering the boat into that bloody great iceberg over there.
And also, at some point, Johnson will go. And the likes of Zahawi will think, I want to be in position to take over a proper Tory party with proper policies and a proper plan for the country when this...
Or thereabouts. I want to still be... I want to be in the room where it happens.
And then you have the others, though, because I don't think that that's where people like Grant Shapps or Nadine Dorries' heads at. I think they're in the... It's still... The cause is still Johnson and requiring loyalty. But they're there, let's face it, because if they're not loyal to him, they'd be out on their ear. They would not have a hope in hell of getting anywhere near that position if it wasn't for feigning loyalty, just absolute... bending.
Well, that's, to be fair, that is why I picked Zahawi, because I think that the sort of weird, ignorant sycophancy is easy to describe and to discern. I mean, it's shaming and it's horrible, but yes, and the Zahawi line would be that I have to. What am I going to do if you speak up or speak out, you end up toast. You get purged, and yet. I want to be here because I think I can do some good. And that, for the time being, means appearing on television and defending the very, very bad. And humiliating myself in the process. That's just Mark's theory. And I'll tell you what, Mark, actually, that considering that wasn't the question you were expecting to answer when I embarked on another interminable monologue, and it was the one that I was asking just before you came on to answer a completely different one, that's 10 out of 10, mate.
I can have opinions on most things relating to this government at the drop of a hat. Can I just say one final thing?
Not really, only if you can do it in 8 seconds, because I'm incredibly late.
I went to the Tory party conference this year as part of my job.
Oh, yeah.
And there are clearly Tory MPs that really want to do the best for this country.
I know there are.
There are others that don't. And we've just talked about some of the different ones.
Yeah, powerfully put. Very powerfully put. And some of these Tory MPs even speak to me off the record, would you believe? And I'm not here to criticise them. I'm really not. I do understand their motivation, and it is pretty much what Mark just attributed to Nadhim Zahawi, although he is not one of the MPs who has bent my ear at any moment in the last couple of years. Straight to the calls. There's been plenty of me in the last couple of hours, and then I'll tell you what we're going to talk about in the final hour of the show today. Matthew's in Brighouse. Matthew, take your pick. What do you want to say?
I want to try and expand a little bit upon your last caller, really, and look at how do we get here? Why are people being complicit in keeping us there? And then also to touch upon the whole notion of Trump and Johnson and parallels and things like that. I think we get here because it was all about protection of interest and the status quo. The world's changing enormously, economic power, political power changing. And I think that Johnson was born of that, Brexit was born of that, of a desire to protect a certain way of doing things, Britannia rules the waves and all that kind of stuff. It's a bit of an oversimplification, but that's how we get there. And Johnson wins elections. And all of us, when we vote, hold our nose a little bit and look the other way to a greater or lesser extent when we vote for somebody. And the Conservatives were prepared to do that with Johnson because he could win, and he keeps winning. And so people like to use the example of Zahawi. They will, to a certain extent, keep looking the other way and holding their nose. There probably will come a point, I think your last caller was right, where they can't keep looking the other way and holding their nose.
Do you?
But there's a parallel there between
Trump.
Johnson over here and Trump over there.
Yeah,
good Republicans. There are good Republicans in the same way there are still good Conservative MPs who come into politics for all the right reasons and want to do the right thing. And they looked the other way with Trump, and they held their noses with Trump because it was the lesser of two evils.
And that's where that's where perhaps my own naivety kicks in, because my question then is, why would you want power if you can't use it to do good? And then we disagree on what good is, I suppose, as well, don't we?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that there will still be things that this Conservative government will do that Zahawi will say are a price worth paying. And if it
can't think of any off the top of my head, can you?
No, I'm struggling too, but there we are. But I think it ties in as well. You know, I think you saw the same thing when Corbyn was elected leader of the Labour Party. You know, so many people in the Labour Party and on the left voted for Corbyn and kept supporting Corbyn, even though they knew there were these flaws, even though they were having to look the other way, because they wanted a change in the status quo.
Yeah,
so
that seems fair.
There are direct parallels between the two. And just to tie in with your chap that likes it when people lie because it winds you up.
Yeah.
And how you get to people like that. In a funny kind of way, they're only doing the same way that they're doing the same thing that people like Zahawi are doing.
Yeah.
They want things to be a certain way.
It's a vicarious success.
Yeah, and it's very easy to persuade somebody. You know, the one thing that the whole Brexit and so much of Johnson's shtick is, by bringing someone else up, you'll get put down. So by improving the lot of the Romanian who comes to this country, by improving the lot of the person on the other side of the world, there's only a finite amount in the pie and they're taking your slice. And that's how it's done. It's been done for years. Politics of fear, etc., etc. And Johnson's very good, and the Conservative Party, the modern current Conservative Party, have been very good at feeding on that, of selling that to people.
Although I think they might be running out of road, because I don't think Johnson was troubled by immigration in the context of European Union membership, but he just weaponised it, and so did Cummings, and of course they hitched themselves to Farage's despicable posters and his often profoundly racist rhetoric. But the new immigration, you see, if the newspapers decide to weaponise the immigration figures now, the Tories are toast. I mean, I don't know who'd step into the breach, but the numbers out now are, I suppose they'd worry about a party appearing to the right of them. Because they can't currently blame it on something they don't like Brussels. The immigration figures are barely getting reported. Migration Watch desperately jumping up and down, screaming, and barely getting picked up, whereas once these sort of stories, these sort of numbers would have been front-page news, because there's no end game at the moment in complaining about immigration. Who are you going to get rid of?
Well, and I think what they'll do is that will cease to be a story, and they'll find another one, because again, it's about this maintenance of power.
Well, they're trying to turn woke. They're trying to make woke the new enemy, and you know, this on a day where we learn of another 14-year-old schoolgirl. Well, the last one was 15, mixed race on this occasion, again being strip searched by Metropolitan Police while menstruating, and no doubt there'll be people complaining later about stories in the newspaper urging police officers to become more aware of black history and more aware of what you might call woke issues, so that they can stop being racist in situations like these two poor schoolgirls being treated in ways that you can't quite imagine anybody else being treated. And I mentioned that as a brilliant, again, callers today off the scale, not for the first while, it's frequent occurrence, isn't it now? But thank you, Matthew. I'll be nicking some of your ideas and passing them off as my own, which is the highest compliment I can pay a caller. But the numbers I'm referring to, 25% increase in work visas and a 49% increase in family visas, a 52% increase in student visas. 24 Tory politicians, very much on the right of the party, or the far right of the party, sounding the alarm over this data and suggesting that the figure for this year could be higher than any in recent history. And they're not coming from Europe. So the callers I used to get saying they were voting for Brexit in order to cut down on the number of brown faces behind the tills in Tesco, well, they're like Tinder now, and it's a question of who's going to come along and light it. They've tried it with the poor fellas and women in boats coming into Dover, all getting deported to Rwanda now. So essentially what Priti Patel's done there is call her own supporters racist liars, because they're supposed to pretend that they want people with valid asylum claims to stay here. But the ones getting sent back to Rwanda are never going to be able to stay here, whether their application is found to be valid or not. So that's not working, despite Farage turning up in Kent with his Fisher-Price binoculars every other day and a little camcorder. What would happen when they start to weaponise that again? I don't know. I'm just pointing out the manipulative air or part of this whole conversation.